Welcome back, guys. Another podcast for you here. I'm going to jump right into it. It's coming from a question that came from our training library. And it's not a hard question. I think it's one that a lot of people will probably be able to relate to, though, on a couple different planes, I suppose. But I'll jump into it here. It says, "Hey, Jeremy, apologize if this gets long-winded." And so that a lot of the longer questions that I'm getting, I'm finding that there's just so much into them that it's hard to always answer them what I think in a thorough way back via email. So if you're not familiar, our training library, which is relatively new, it's new this year, within the last year, is on our website, and it's a subscription-based thing. So you become a member, and members get access to all the videos, which is all of our training videos that we've done, our puppy, our foundation, our shed, which are all formally produced. They're all over 3 hours long, so they're pretty lengthy, but you can still get them as DVDs and you can still buy them as a digital download, but we have included them as part of this library, along with, I think we're up to about 136 hours, which sometimes that doesn't sound like a lot, but 136 hours is a lot of video. We're adding to it regularly, so we continue to add to it as we produce series, but with the membership, you get access to all that video, but you also get an email address that is essentially, you get like a token or a credit, basically, to send me a direct email that comes to this separate email. It's not my regular email. It's just training questions. So I do my best to really put a lot of effort into those responses. I'm just not able to keep up with training questions on my regular email. I will answer some occasionally if they're quick and easy, but a lot of times they're just not. It's just not a good platform for me to be able to do that. So this gives people that access. But what I like to do is give a thorough answer, and sometimes it's just even hard to do that. So I have turned, and you've heard it probably if you listen to this podcast, I have turned several of them into podcast episodes, which is what I'm doing here today. But I want to, just touching on the library, I want to thank our members. This has been the reason we did it is because I think it's the best way to be able to help more people. And so by creating this library, what we're not doing is, and I don't want it to be confused with the idea of like a training program. It's not a training program. It's not a course. It's not It's just not designed that way, and the reason is because I just feel like it's really hard to do that and have it be beneficial to the majority of people, because I don't believe in the idea of following a specific course or path with any of my dogs, because I think it's so predicated on the dog itself, what it is we're trying to do with them. There's just a lot of variables. So when we called this a training library, the idea with it was, if I want to learn something about a subject, and I can go to the library, and it's full of information, but it puts a little bit of an onus on me to search that information out actively. It takes effort, and you have to go get it. You got to go get the right information. You got to find the information, and then you got to actually study the information. But if you do that, if you put that effort in, if you have that resource to use, you actually use it, I think that the end result is going to be a lot more successful more often. So that was the idea that we built this library is let's take a lot of information and put it in an easy place for people to get. And the training series work a lot better in the training library than they do on a YouTube platform, because YouTube kind of rabbit holes you into different stuff, where a lot of the videos we've done over the years and continue to do are really documented series of specific dogs with specific issues that we specifically try to work through. So, but I do think that it can be relatable to a lot of people. And so that's the background on the library. Now, this question comes from one of our members, and it says, "I apologize for the long-winded question. My fiance and I recently picked up Audie, a female chocolate lab, 14 weeks old. We're both eager to work with her and raise her right. I dove headfirst into the training library, and I've been listening to your podcasts for the last week or so. Wish I could rewind the tape and have done this prior to getting the dog. So that's another reason why I wanted to read this question, was because I think there's a lot of folks that wait till they get the dog. They get the dog at, say, let's 8-week-old puppy. They wait until they get them, and then in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on the dog and depending on what you're doing with the dog, they go, oh shit, I have all these problems. And they become a little bit overwhelmed with it, because what happened in a relatively short period of time really feels like a big burden right now. It didn't happen overnight. But what ends up happening is you just let these dogs kind of, I hate the line, let puppies be puppies. I love the line, let puppies be puppies. I've talked about this before. I think let puppies be puppies has very different meanings to different people. And what I like is, I like letting puppies be puppy in the idea of, like, I don't want to be super formal. I don't need to put a lot of stress or pressure on them. I really just need them to trust me and love me, and me fall in love with them those first weeks at their home. I need them to get comfortable. I need them to get confident. I need to do things like that. And so that's, to me, letting a puppy be a puppy. What is not letting a puppy be a puppy is raise hell and create lots of habits that are undesirable. Because those first few weeks, those habits that are formed stick, and they're always harder to change than the ones, for whatever reason it is like, if you put a good habit into a dog, it seems like you got to be really consistent with it. You got to do it over and over and over and over again. And then all of a sudden light bulbs turn on. It seems like with a bad habit or something that I don't like, I feel like a lot of times they do it once and you're stuck because they just don't forget it. It's in them. And so all the more reason I feel it's so important to start from the beginning with the idea of, what are my goals and how am I going to accomplish them? And I need to really be working on it now with the big picture in mind. It doesn't mean you're accomplishing all the goals at that point, because that comes into this idea of patience and the idea of letting the dog kind of develop. Let them be a puppy. But let them be a puppy in the right way, constructively. So I think this is a really big point that he brings up. And if you're listening to this and you are nodding your head in agreement, you know what I'm saying. And I don't think I'll have to tell you. This message isn't for you, because you already know. The message is for the person that knows they're getting a dog or just got the dog. Now is the time to be prepared. Prior to the puppy coming is the time, and we don't think about stuff in today's world that way. Like we have a line of products that's in the deer world. It's a brand called Hodeg. We sell more Hodeg stuff once the season starts, which archery seasons mostly, most places are starting to say, let's just say September 1st. We sell more stuff between September 1st and November 1st than any other time of the year. Yet our products on our Hodeg brand, to me, I get my best results with them in June, July, August, and then preparing for the season is when they are the most helpful for me, not necessarily during it. And especially not during like the middle of the season. Like we sell a lot of stuff in October, and I think it's great because I think they'll work for these people, but they're not going to work as well as if they would have put them out in August. They're not going to get the benefits out of them as they would have if they put it out in August, because they know a hell of a lot more about the deer if they put it out in July and August come November than if they put it out in October and hope to learn a bunch. It just doesn't work that way. And so when it comes to training a dog, if your puppies, like I've got puppies here, they're 4 weeks old. They're going to go home in 4 weeks. The people that are going to get them are way ahead if they're studying and digging into and learning about and answering their own questions and getting a plan together. I'm not real formal about my plans. I don't think you have to have a journal and write it down. Some people do. That's the way their minds think. Mine doesn't think that way. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I just think some people have really structured minds that they just really feel the important part is like the organization and the layout of the plan. I look at it as I'm a little more free-spirited that way. And I also feel like all that does is lead to disappointment for me, because if you're that type of person, you have a hard time with change in directions typically. And I think to plan and plan and plan and put all that effort and work into it, to realize you're probably going to change that plan multiple times, you got to be nimble and pivot. And so I like to be a little looser that way. So that's how but I've got I feel like over the years I've collected a lot of information and a lot of stuff in my library internally to have as a resource. Well, some folks don't have that, and it took a long time for me to be able to kind of collect some of those things. This is the way to be able to one-stop shop that information. But you got to do the work. That's the thing. I'm not giving you the answers to the test. I'm not giving you the test to study with the answers. I'm giving you all the information, and you'll figure out what the questions are on the test as time goes, but you're going to have the information to be able to go back to. That's the whole idea with it. So this person just made a great point. I wish I could rewind the clock, he says, and go back and dig into this. So if you're on the fence, just dig into your stuff now. So better late than never, he says. I appreciate your willingness to share the knowledge that you have of training with us. I have 2 questions that I did not come across yet in the answers yet. I picked Audie up with the intention of training her for sheds. With our inexperience and simply just not knowing any better, she was given a lot of chew toys to play with. I have quickly learned and see why playing tug of war and allowing her to chew on the toys can form bad habits. As expected, she doesn't seem to have a problem with the retrieving part. However, the delivery is another story. She doesn't always like to give it back to us, and she does. And if she does, when she returns it, she'll begin chewing on it and chewing on a balled up sock. From what I have learned so far, I think the best is to stop with retrieves for now. So I'm just going to tackle that right now. So I do think chew toys create habits. They create chewers. I think so. I'm cautious to it. I don't want to train stuff into dogs that I don't ultimately want and eventually would probably have to train out later. And you're seeing that right now. So let's just put it all out there. I don't do chew toys. Sorry, PetSmart. I don't do it. So what I like to do is instead, if there's a toy, which I think toys are for fun, and I think retrieving should be fun. And so I think you kind of alluded to this idea. Your dog retrieves. Your dog is a retriever. So most dogs retrieve, even the ones that aren't retrievers. If you don't believe me, go to the dog park. You'll see every breed you can imagine running and grabbing tennis balls and bringing them back, running and grabbing frisbees, bringing them back, running and grabbing squeaky things and bringing them back. I've seen dogs with just incredibly natural retrieve that are just not retrievers. Now, if you got a retriever, all the more likely you got a dog that will retrieve. So I do think it's important to kind of tap into that a little early and bring it out, and maybe for our own sake and peace of mind, know that we've got a good retriever. So I don't have a problem with doing that early, and you'll see that in all the videos. I make little retrieves. I make them very limited. Couple of retrieves in a row that are good, and we're done. Because of the attention span, partially, puppies get bored of stuff quickly, and I don't want them getting bored of things that I want them to really like. So, but I also think that get a couple good ones and be done, and let that dog want more of it, as opposed to like tiring them out, wearing them out, boring them on it, and then trying to figure out how to get them excited again. Like I just. That's just the approach that I take to it. So less is more in so many situations. And if I can get a couple good retrieves, I'll be done. The problem is if they have a bunch of stuff around them, toys, etc., it's not so easy for them to always understand that, like, they're learning all the time. Like, as they're growing up, they're learning things. So what I don't want them to do is be learning the wrong thing to do. And you're not doing it necessarily intentionally, but like, just imagine a dog that has a room full of toys, or a crate full of toys, or a kennel full of toys. And some of them may and some of them may not represent or resemble things that we want them to ultimately be retrieving for us. But a lot of times they do. I mean, I can't tell you how many people buy, you go to Bass Pro Shops, there's a end cap of like little ducks, little pheasants, little quail. There's usually a squeaky thing in them. They're little plush dog toys. And I've seen it lots of times where these people got their hunting dogs. So what do you got to do? You got to go buy that cute little pheasant stuffy for them and then bring it home and let them chew on it, because that's what they're going to do with it. It's a chew toy. So this little puppy has this thing that looks like a pheasant or a duck or whatever, and they use it to chew on, and then they walk past it a bunch of times, and then they pick it up and carry it around a little bit, and then they play with it and they flip it up in the air and they chase it down themselves. And if there's more than one puppy, God forbid there's more than one puppy, because now it's a game of whose is it going to be, and they're pulling on it and playing on it. They're creating all sorts of behaviors. But then we sit them down and we go in the hallway and we tell them, well, now it's time now they're little puppies, and we're going to say, now it's time for you to be a little gun dog in the making, or a little bird dog in the making. And you expect them to behave differently because you went in the hallway and you decided it's your turn to be a training dog. Well, they're saying, hell, I've been training the whole time and I'm getting pretty good at it. And this is what I do when I see those things. I either grab them or I leave them alone and I'm bored with them, or I pick them up and chew on them, or I play with them, or I flip them around, or I run away from you with them because I've been running away from the other dog with the blue collar the whole time. And now you're just the dog with the blue collar, and that dog says, come catch me. This is fun. You create habits without intentionally doing it that make your job a hell of a lot harder than it needs to be. And I think you're seeing that. So the answer, yes. I'm not saying stop retrieving altogether. I'm saying take away the stuff, because what you can see is, so if your dog's 14 weeks old, you've only had it for 6 weeks, you got 6 weeks of habits in there. Whenever you decide to pull the plug on those bad habits, it's just going to take you longer to kind of counterbalance out the bad habits. So it might take you 12 weeks, twice as long to shape the behavior back in that you want. But whatever it is, and the numbers don't matter, the time doesn't matter, but you'll need to start to right the ship and get it going in the right direction. And it's going to have to be more often, more consistent than it was prior in order to reverse what you've put into them. It can be done, but it takes time. So, and as far as stop retrieving bad. Stop retrieving meaningless. Instead, have every retrieve have meaning, and have every retrieve be right. So that's where controlling the situation, I like always. Balled up socks, if your dog's got a bad habit with balled up socks, go away from them. Because I love balled up socks. I think they're a great tool for young dogs, because I think their little sharp needle teeth get in the strings of it and it's hard for them to spit it out. It weighs nothing. It's perfect size for a little puppy's mouth. So I love them, but if it's created a habit that's negative, don't go back to it. Just change. At 14 weeks old, I would probably be switched to one of our puppy bumpers, our puppy dummies. Our puppy dummies are not weighted intentionally. There's no throw loop on them intentionally. They're sized smaller intentionally. It's to allow the dog to pick up an object that looks a little bit more like what we're going to train with, but it doesn't quite feel as heavy and it's not as hard, and it's easier for them to pick up. So I'd switch to the puppy dummies. By that age, now start a good habit from the beginning with the right tools. I definitely would not leave the dog have access to these dummies. They're only for training. 2-3 times, a couple times a week, 2-3 reps, done. End it on a positive and be done with it, because you already know the answer. Your dog retrieves. You got other issues that you need to avoid and change before you start worrying about more retrieving stuff. So I'll keep moving. We're going to try to, so that was this first question. The second part of it is we're going to try to live by 3 rules that they're either on their place, in their kennels or crates, or with me under 100% supervision for the foreseeable future. He's heard me say that. That's how my dogs have rules when they're little. It keeps them from getting into trouble. It's a very safe thing for them. They're in their crate, they're in their kennels, or they're on their place. And if they're not on those, they're with me and I'm supervising them, not paying attention to them until they earn the trust. So it's not a forever, but it's a for now, until you can prove to me that I don't have to be 100% focused on you, because that's the critical time for them to learn, is when they're really little. And when they make the mistakes, if your correction is good and appropriate and the timing is right, they'll learn from it. If it's not, if it's off, if you miss it, if it's too much, if it's too little, you're going to create other issues. So that's the reason for it. It says, I'm struggling to find playtime, in quotes. Activities that do not undermine our training efforts. Do you have a few go-to play/leisure time activities that you do with your younger pups? It's especially difficult for my fiance, who doesn't want to undermine our training, but still wants to be able to have playtime with the dog. I'm just not sure what to do or say. So the answer to that is, yeah, I would say I do have playtime. Like, I think playtime needs to be defined, though. Playtime doesn't mean freedom of loss of control. Playtime doesn't mean go get in trouble. Like, playtime could be following me walk around that yard. Playtime could be walking. I take little short walks. People will call them puppy walks all the time, and I love the idea of them. Exploration walks, whatever you want to call them. It's just exposing dogs to environments in a safe, relatively controlled way, but there's some freedom to it that at 14 weeks they've probably earned, which means when I call them, they should come back to me. If I can't do that, well, then I can't give them too much freedom, because I'm just creating a problem. So if you got some of that foundation stuff going, which you should by this time, then those little walks allow, because they're bold enough now to get off my heels. When they're 8 weeks old, I'll do the exact same thing. I go for little walks. They're just shorter. They're easier. They're not as challenging. They're not as diverse of an environment, because the little dog doesn't have the confidence and boldness and physical attributes to get out yet. It usually just follows behind me. Well, what do I do during that window of time? I teach them to recall. This goes back to, you should have watched the videos a long time ago, because that 8-week window would have allowed, if you're struggling with recall, that 8, 9, 10 weeks, those 2 to 3 week windows there, I usually see it around 12 weeks where they get a little bit more confident and they start to test you a little bit. It's not a set in stone date, but it seems to be pretty consistent. But that first 3, 4 weeks, when you bring the puppy home until that time period, I just think that that's the best time to teach them to come to you when you call them, because they're coming to you anyway. So just correlate it and have them understand this thing happens every time I'm coming to dad, whether it be little whistle peeps, whether it be come on, whether it's here, whether it's body language where I get down and I put my hands out and I welcome them in, whatever it is, it's a combination of all of those for me. But you get this dog to be brainwashed to come to you when you do certain things. It's Pavlov, it's classic conditioning. But you don't even have to do it. All you got to do is walk around, because they come anyway. They don't want to be left alone when they're that little. And so if you take advantage of that, step 1, well, then step 2 is so much easier. If you're missing step 1, step 2, how the hell do you do 3 and 4? So that's the part where, so then you go back. If you're at that age where you could be doing that, or maybe should be doing that, well, just go back and treat it like it's step 1 and step 2. I tell people, I just did a podcast with Gundog It Yourself, and if you listen to it, we talked a little bit about place training. And I talked about a story about a guy that said his dog couldn't get place trained. He was 5 years old. And I place trained it in a relatively short period of time. Now, it wasn't a complete project, but it was, I got the dog to do the behavior in a relatively short period of time, and he couldn't believe it. And most of the people that watched it couldn't believe it. It was at one of our workshops. The thing about it was, I told him, I said in this podcast, I said, I couldn't physically pick the puppy up and put it back and put it on the place. Like that's how I would do it with a puppy. If a puppy jumped off, I'd scoop him up. I'd tell him, and I'd put him back on the place. Like, I'd physically pick him up and set him down. You can do that with an 8-week-old, 9-week-old, 10-week-old, 11-week-old. Some dogs, you can, they get to the point where they're just a little too big to do that with. So here's a 5-year-old lab that weighed 65 pounds. I couldn't do it the exact same way that I would have done it or did do it with the 8-week-old puppy. Instead, so I modified it. It was the same philosophy. It was the same actions. It was modified by simply putting a lead on that dog. And when the dog came off, I corrected with the lead and I brought it back up onto the place. It's exact same, but different. So this is going to be the same. You're going to take a dog that's 14 weeks old, and if you're having a hard time with it, you're going to go back to what you did with the puppy, what you should have done with the 8-week-old puppy. It's just now you're going to physically have to change it. You can't go in your front yard anymore and do it because the dog's going to go to the neighbor's yard, or the dog's going to go across the road, or whatever it's going to do. So what do? You better find yourself an environment that's controlled. Small area. Maybe it's the garage with no car in it. Maybe it's your basement. Maybe it's you might have to go find a classroom that allows you to, there's nothing in it. Whatever it is, you got to get creative. You have to have a spot. Could be a fenced-in backyard. Could be real simple. It could be as complicated as you want to make it. I try to keep things simple. But you just have to manipulate the environment to get the dog's behavior back on track at that age until you do it consistently enough that it starts to show you that it can do it, and then change the environment and make it a little bit less tempting, or a little more tempting, a little less controlled. Not so less controlled that you lose control, because now you're back to zero. But you build on it. And that's just a pattern that takes place with every single thing I do with every dog I do. So he says, the second question is she tends to nip. So that's the idea of this playtime. There are all kinds of playtime could be in your living room. I wouldn't put a whole bunch of toys on the ground and say, have at her. Instead, I'd sit down on the floor with it. I watched the Makina series. This is playtime with Makina, and I formally got some benefit out of it. It helped me with her retrieve at the time, which she was struggling with. I sat on the floor with me and at the time she was a 4-year-old daughter, a 3-year-old daughter, I think at the time. She's 5 now, but we sat on the floor in our kitchen. We had a bowl of food, and we let this little puppy run around in the kitchen because there was nothing else for it to get into, and it was. I'd call her and she'd come to me, and I took little pieces of kibble and I just rolled them across the floor, and I let her chase them and catch them and eat them and come back to me. That was playtime. It was really structured playtime. I gained the idea of her chasing something and getting a reward, which was going to help me later when I tried to send her on a retrieve, which at the time she was struggling on. It was, she'd come back to me and I'd give her a little piece of kibble. We did this all at dinner time. So we killed a lot of birds with one stone here. We got the dog fed. We got the dog to run out after something. We got the dog to come back to us. Every time it was fun and enjoyable because she got to eat her food. So there were times where I'd stop her and make her stand still and throw a piece of food. And then I'd let her go. I built a little steadiness at that point. So I did it with a 3-year-old kid. And it was a fun time for her and the kid and me, and super informal. And so that's playtime. I think what you got to ask yourself is, what do you define as playtime? If your definition and your wife's fiance's definition of playtime is run amok, then I'm going to say, no, don't do it. Because all that's going to do is make your job harder. Playtime should be learning time with a little bit of freedom. Let them learn. My kid goes to this, my 5-year-old goes to this school where I don't think I'd have done well in the environment myself because I'm not so self-motivated and driven when it comes to education, but they work at their own speed. They get labs or little areas that they get to go do stuff, and the kids are taught stuff, but then they basically have the freedom to go do it. And they check stuff off the list. Yeah, I can count to 100. I did it by playing with this game that's got 100 numbers, and I got to organize them and put them in order. And they can get stuff wrong, but then they learn, and the teacher kind of helps them. But the teacher doesn't teach a class. It's not 20 kids sitting there listening to the teacher explain it. It's the teacher kind of bounces around the room, gives these kids a little bit of an understanding of what these little laboratory areas are. And some of the stuff is super simple, and some of the stuff gets a little bit more complicated. And some of it gets a lot more complicated by the end. She doesn't plug these kids into these little labs and say, do the hard stuff first. She says, here, do this really simple stuff. And then once you got that and you can show it to me and you can figure it out, we'll let you check this little box and say you did it. And now you can start learning to do this part 2, which is really just like a little bit more than part 1 was. And then they struggle with it for a little bit and they figure it out. And then they take that and they go to part 3. And all of a sudden they're through. So they're like learning at their own little pace or whatever. Well, I think it's a brilliant way for some minds to develop. And I think puppies a lot of times are like that. If you just give them some direction and help them make the right decisions in the start, but then you use like, you got to get creative on your end and like be able to build these little sessions out. Like for me, I've never done that before where I sat on the ground with a bowl of food and rolled it down and let the dog chase it. And I'll tell you the reason I did it. It's because I couldn't get her to go chase a dummy. I tried doing it the way I do with my retrievers, which used to be, watch the videos. You put them in the hallway, you put your arm around them, you steady them up a bit, you toss the dummy or the sock or whatever, and you just let the puppy go, and she, predator-prey instinct, chases down that sock, catches it, retriever instinct in her turns around and brings it back to me. It's totally just giving her a chance to succeed. I did the exact same thing with my setter, and she looked at it and did not chase it. I teased her with it. I tried all sorts of ways to get her to be aggressive and try to catch this thing. Nope. She was not that interested in it. If she did, she'd walk down towards it, like calm and slowly. And then she'd sniff it a little bit out of curiosity, and then she'd turn around and come back to me and want to do something different. Just didn't have it. Just didn't have that instinct in her. So one day, at the time I think she was 3, Lillian, took a piece of food while I was feeding the dogs, and she just threw it. And Makina ran after it and grabbed it and turned around and came right back to her. And she just, I saw her do it, and everything in her body language looked to me like a retriever making a retrieve. That's where this little light bulb in my head went. Well, she looks like I want her to look doing that. That's, doing that action, that activity, she gave me the visual of what I wanted to try to get out of her with a dummy, and I couldn't get it. So I thought, well, let's do what she wants to do. Let's do it how she learns. That's not even learning for her. That was in her. So I said, let's try it. Lillian, come here. Let's do this. We played this little game. We did it for a couple minutes. And I saw more progress in her towards what I wanted her to do, which was ultimately make a retrieve with the dummy. We made better progress in that session than we had done, a dozen times before, doing what I thought was the way to do it. So I had to be open-minded enough to recognize and read the dog and go, that's the action I want. What got that? How can I replicate it? So that's a really long-winded way to come back to the idea of playtime. Hell yeah, lots of it, more of it, do it. Don't do it in a way that's going to create problems. Have the vision, take a step back and go, if we do this, are we going in the right direction as far as our end goals? Are we going to be better after we do this? Or are we going to be worse after we do this? What potential problems could this create? What potential benefits would this shape? And then cherry pick what you do based on those answers. Okay, so the third part. And he says it's the second question, but it's really the third, I think. The second question is, she tends to nip and bite at our hands, not in an aggressive way, but I think it's due to us holding, bouncing, using chew toys with her. I assume she is just associating her hands with being a part of that toy. By removing the chew toys, do you think it's enough to stop the biting, or is there other steps we should be taking? I should note that we have been trying to hold and pinch her nose and lips when she bites, but this hasn't seemed to offer any sort of change in the behavior. So I would disagree with the idea that I think she thinks they're chew toys. I don't think she thinks they're chew toys. I think she's testing you. I think that's a dominance thing at times. It's a playful thing at times. She's trying to see what can I get out of these people? I'd like to fool around. I'd like to do undesirable things right now. Can I get them to do it with me? So without seeing it, I can't pinpoint it, but all of the above applies, I think, to the nipping and biting behavior. And I'll tell you right now, dogs don't nip and bite me. So this is not a good answer for most people, because I'm going to tell you a different answer after. But to start out, I'm going to say I don't know because dogs don't nip and bite me. And you'll say, screw you. They do me. So how do I fix that? Well, here's the reason they don't nip and bite me. It's because it comes back to this idea of testing. I really believe they're testing to see where they are in this pack. They'll go up and nip and bite my daughter. They'll go up and nip and bite a stranger. They'll at times nip and bite my wife. They just don't do it to me. And the reason I think it is because of how I carry myself around them. And I'm not an asshole to my dogs. I don't beat them up, but I don't take shit from them either. And I'm real fair about it. I think that's the important part is I think dogs really respect the idea of fairness. And when I say fairness, I mean don't play Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Don't give them multiple personalities. Give them consistency all the way across the board. And that's how you treat them as well. I think that you make them question things about you when you're inconsistent in your bipolar actions. And I see it so often. I see 1 minute person's on their dog and hollering at them, and the next minute they're talking with them with baby voices and grabbing a hold of them and shaking them up and like teasing them. And I go, you just bitched at the dog for nipping at you, and now you're teasing it to be playful with you. Well, what is their nature is to be nippy, and test that. And so I think you got to be more consistent. And the reason I don't think they bite me is because I just don't give them the sense of I could get away with shit with this guy. They just don't. They really have a nice respect for me. Part of it is because of how I carry myself. Part of it is probably because I'm a little bit bigger. Part of it is because I'm pretty calm around them. I don't get a lot of that baby voice stuff going. I do at times when I need it. I save it for that. That's not my normal conversation with them. I've noticed it because of videos, because we filmed so much stuff. I've noticed how often I'm talking in videos. It drives me nuts. I can't stand how often I'm talking. But if you watch, a lot of times it's me talking and the verbiage is actually like either to the camera or explaining what I'm doing so that people that are watching it can understand. Because one time I was at a seminar and a buddy of mine said, you need to talk through whatever it is that's in your head. You need to like say it out loud so that people can understand it. And I think that was really an important thing for me to realize is people aren't going to get it by just watching it, because there's such subtle things that happen that if you're not like looking for it, you're missing it. And so I started to like talk about it, and I got in this habit of doing this. This was like 10 years ago. And I got in this habit of doing it. And then I started doing it on the videos. And if you watch back on some of the videos, I explained that when I first started doing that, because I felt so uncomfortable talking so much. But I said, I have to, because I want to relay what I'm thinking so you understand it as a viewer. That became a habit for me. And now I watch some of these videos and it's just painful for me to listen to. I just don't think you should talk so much. And when I work with dogs without cameras, I just don't even say much, hardly at all. Like really a little bit of verbal communication, but a hell of a lot of physical, like body language communication. So I carry myself with the dogs in a way that just does not prompt them to nip. Now, if they do, because sometimes they do, it's not all the time. If they do, I usually have it fixed so quickly and get them on track with where they need to be as far as respecting me and understanding, like, I'm not gonna test this guy. I'm not gonna go and nip and bite at him and see what I can get away with. It's because when it happens, if it happens, I put my hand down by a dog and it snaps at me, nips at me, bites at my fingers, jumps. I keep my cool. This is not an emotion-filled response. It can't be, because it'll screw you up. But you keep your cool and you just be swift and sharp, and I pick them up by the scruff of their neck. I mean, they're usually little. They're really little. I reach around, I grab them by the scruff of their neck, I pick them up, and that's enough. Enough. Like that tone, about that volume. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of audible. It's not a lot of volume. It's not a lot of physical. It's enough to pick them up by the scruff of. You can pick your puppies at that age. You can pick those puppies up by the scruff of the neck and set them in the clothes basket or whatever to clean the cat. It's mom carries them around that way. So like it's not like it's a big. You're not beating the dog up, and you shouldn't. If you are, you got to understand where to measure your levels of pressure. But to pick the puppy up quickly startles them. At times they'll yip. It's not because of the physical part, I don't believe. I think it's because they're startled. They go, holy shit. They're paying attention. And as soon as I set them down, because they're done. At that point, it's done. They're not fighting me. They've submitted. They're done. I'm done. You can just feel it in them. You set them back. I set them back down. I give them a little bit of a pet. You're good. Doesn't happen again. If they fire back at me and bite at me again, it's because you just weren't very serious about it. Your dog called BS on you. And they'll do that too. So you got to gauge how much pressure. So I'm always in favor when it comes to a correction of, I would like to give a little bit less than a little bit more, because I can always go up. And if you go too much, sometimes it's a bigger hill to climb to kind of rebuild that in them, rebuild the confidence in them. So, but I'll make mistakes. There are videos out there, especially heel work videos that we've posted, where I've put probably a new dog to me, and I thought this dog was going to be this big, tough dog, and I saw it just abusing its owner, and I take it and I give it one correction, and it's too much. And I say it a lot of times, that was too much. I didn't need to give her that much. I didn't need to give him that much. The next one's a lot softer. Results are the same. Dog just gives. Almost always the dog just gives in. Gets them right where I need them. But so this is no different. It's just on a different scale. So I think the idea of like, the easy answer is become a good leader. You don't want your dog to bite and nip at you? Be a good leader. They don't do that to the good leaders. Get their respect. And in the moment, so that's the big picture answer. The treatment to the symptom, which is nipping and biting, in the moment is that it's a very sharp correction. And by that, it doesn't mean a ton of pressure. And I say it that way. It's a very sharp, crisp, clean correction. Timing's got to be good. Pressure's got to be right. That doesn't mean a lot. It doesn't mean a little. It means the right. And that's where feel comes into this whole thing. You got to feel it. The best trainers have good feel, because you can feel how much of everything. You can feel when things need to be done. You can feel when things aren't getting done. And so it's a deeper pool to jump into, but look at any of the videos, those videos that we talked about, and you're going to see that. Now that you hear this, if you watched some of those videos and some of those examples prior to this conversation, I think you'll get stuff out of them. If you watch them after you hear this, you've got a few more things fresh in your mind to be watching for that are probably very important, that you'll pick up on easier because of it. So, Roy, I'm going to send you a message that I'm going to get this podcast to the guys, have them get it live as quick as possible. But Roy, I appreciate you being a member of the library. I appreciate your patience with me getting this answer back. This is over a week ago, so I apologize for that. But I hope this helps. I hope this gives you a little bit more than what I could have thumbed out on my phone or typed on a computer. But guys, I hope this helps you as well, because Roy's question, I think, will help more than just Roy. If you are interested in our training library, I would say try it. It's a subscription thing. You can try it for 1 month. It's $24, $23.99, $24.99, something like that. It'll give you 10% off of our website sales. It gives you access for the email. It'll let you know if it's worth it or not. You can look at all the stuff that's in there. You just can't, without being a member, but you just can't access the videos. So it's a real easy process. It's a pretty simple sign up. You put in your account information. You basically build an account, make the payment, and you've got access to it. So I also want to, at the same time, I got a call from a guy today that was a library member that had a lot of really nice things to say about it, and I appreciate that greatly. And I want to thank you guys for being members. It's a really easy way of supporting what we're doing. But it is measurable. Like, it's measurable for us. We can see the number of members. We can see the number of hours that get watched. I get to have another level of communication with people, like I did here with Roy. But it was a lot of work, and it feels great to get that feedback. So I want to thank the people that are members of it. If you like these podcasts, do me a favor. Share it with someone that you think it might help. That is our goal and our objective. And the best way for us, small companies like us, I would recommend you do it for other podcasts too. If you like podcasts and you like what you're getting from the people that are doing them, leaving reviews for them, leaving ratings for them, and then sharing them with people that you think would benefit from them is a really great way for you to help. And so I appreciate that if you'd be willing to do it. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I'm going to get this to the guys, get them turn it around, and we'll keep going from there. So.